a silent alley, but the truth left its mark. Welcome to Mystery Sherlock. I am your host, Edward Sterling. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. This community makes it special. Now the story begins. It is perhaps a failing of mine, if failing it be, that I cannot pass a narrow London court or a soot-stained archway without feeling the ghost of some old adventure stir within me. The city has a memory, and in no place is that memory more stubborn than in those cramped arteries where the sun seldom reaches the stones and where the very bricks seem steeped in the confidences of 1,000 hurried footsteps. I recall with a particular vividness one bitter evening in late November of '89 when the fog lay so thick upon Baker Street that the lamps shone like pale moons adrift in a yellow sea. Within our rooms, however, there was warmth, both of fire and spirit, for Sherlock Holmes, in one of those rare moods when his energies were neither sunk in languor nor driven to fevered extremes, had set his violin aside and was engaged in that pastime which, next to the solving of problems, afforded him the keenest enjoyment, the analysis of mankind. He sat, as he often did, long limbs gathered into a careless attitude upon the sofa, his sharp profile outlined against the ruddy glow of the coal fire. A morning's newspaper lay discarded upon his knee, but his eyes were not on the print. They had that far-off, inward look which I had learned to associate with some chain of reasoning unwinding behind his composed exterior. Upon the table near him stood a thin glass of claret, untouched, and a litter of odds and ends, pipe, tobacco pouch, a chemical monograph, testifying to the varied currents of his mind. For my own part, I had been attempting, not with great success, to bring order to a heap of case notes which had grown formidable of late. There are few occupations so humbling to the vanity as the arranging of one's own recorded observations. For in the quiet of the study, a man sees plainly where he has missed the obvious, where he has written too much, and where he has understood too little. I had just condemned myself with some irritation for having described in undue detail the pattern of a muddy boot print when Holmes's voice cut in upon my thoughts. "You have been to see a patient in Kensington," said he, without so much as turning his head. I looked up, startled, though by then I had had enough experience to be more amused than astonished. "Indeed?" I asked. "Ay, but and pray how do you make that out?" "Pray do not affect surprise, my dear Watson," he returned languidly. "It is the weapon with which mediocre minds attempt to parry the sharp edge of observation. Your left cuff is faintly stained with carbolic, your right boot is splashed with yellow clay from the Notting Hill cuttings, and you have in your pocket a small paper parcel which has not been opened. The parcel was given you by a woman, one who keeps house with care, but not with luxury. It contains something edible. You have not eaten it, because you have been engaged, upon your return, in the laborious task of making your notes presentable, an occupation which always inclines you to abstinence." I could not help laughing. "Your conclusions are as theatrical as ever," said I, "but in the main they are true. Mrs. Mapleton, a widow in Kensington pressed a slice of seed cake upon me as I left. I confess I have not touched it." Holmes held out his hand without looking, and I, with a resigned smile, placed the parcel in his palm. He unwrapped it with the dexterity of a conjurer and bit into the cake as though it were the most natural sequel to a deduction. "It is excellent," said he critically. "You see, Watson, how much may be learned from trifles. The world is full of obvious things which nobody, by any chance, ever observes." "You forget," I protested, "that there are those of us who must earn our bread by attending to other trifles, pulse, tongue, and temperature." "And there are those of us," he murmured, "who must earn our bread by attending to the pulse, tongue, and temperature of society itself."
There was a pause then, a comfortable one.
Eyed as between old comrades, broken only by the snap of the fire and the distant rumble of wheels muffled by the fog. Mrs. Hudson moved somewhere below, and the house seemed to settle around us like a well-worn coat. It was in that moment of quiet that the first knock came upon our door. It was not the brisk rap of a tradesman, nor the impatient tattoo of a client who fears delay, but a hesitant, uneven tapping, timid at first, then repeated with a sudden desperation, as though the hand had changed its mind midway between caution and urgency. Holmes's eyes sharpened. He set down the cake with a neatness which suggested that he had already abandoned all thought of it. "Come in," he called. The door opened slowly, and there entered a man whom I should hardly have expected to find in Baker Street at so late an hour. And he was young, no more than 25, yet there was something already worn in his bearing, as though the world had handled him roughly in so short a time. His clothes were respectable, and even of good cut, but they had been put on without care. The cravat sat awry, and there were beads of moisture upon his hat brim where the fog had clung to it. His face was pale and finely made, but drawn, and his eyes, grey, quick, and haunted, moved about the room as if seeking some assurance that he had come to the right place. For a moment he stood on the threshold, uncertain. Then, catching sight of Holmes, he seemed to gather himself and stepped forward. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. Holmes inclined his head. "You have found him?" said he. "Pray sit down. You are Mr. Julian Harrow of Lincoln's Inn, and you have been robbed." "No."
"Are wronged. Within the last 24 hours?" The young man half started, his hand tightening upon the back of the chair he had not yet taken. How can you know my name?" he stammered. Holmes's thin smile flickered. "Your card case protrudes by half an inch from the inner pocket of your coat," said he. "It bears the initials J.H., and the edge is worn, which suggests frequent use and therefore a profession where one is obliged to present one's name. The faint dusting of paper fibres upon your sleeve and the ink stain upon your second finger point to clerical work. The particular cut of your coat is that favoured by young barristers who wish to appear established. As to the wrong, your expression is not that of mere loss. You are angry, and beneath the anger there is fear." The man sank into the chair as if his knees had given way.
His hands trembled slightly. He made an effort at composure, and in doing so betrayed that he was accustomed, at least in some degree, to discipline himself. "I am indeed Julian Harrow," said he. "I came because I was told, because everyone says, that you see what others cannot." Holmes waved his hand toward me. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who keeps my notes and occasionally keeps me from starving," said he. "Speak freely before him." Harrow glanced at me with a quick, almost apologetic look, and then fixed his gaze again upon Holmes. "It is not theft," he began, "at least not in the common sense. Nothing of value has been taken, nothing tangible. And yet I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, that if what has happened is not set right, a man will hang for it, perhaps more than one." Holmes leaned forward, his long fingers steepled.
"Hanging implies murder?" said he quietly. Harrow licked his lips. The simple word seemed to dry his throat. "Yes," he said. "Murder, and the strangest circumstances. The police, they have an answer already." "Scotland Yard always has an answer," Holmes observed. "When it lacks an explanation, pray proceed." "It occurred last night," Harrow went on, "in a place called Fetter's Alley." At the name, something stirred in my memory. Fetter's Alley is one of those narrow passages which lie like forgotten seams between the larger streets near Fleet Street, place of shuttered windows, of overhanging eaves, and of shops that sell things you did not know existed. By day it is merely dismal. By night, when the fog thickens and the gas lamps burn low, it becomes positively sinister. Harrow continued,
or speaking now with a rapidity that betrayed the pressure under which he laboured. There is a lodging-house there, Hobson's Court they call it, the sort of place where clerks and small tradesmen rent a room. I have had a friend there, a man named Edwin Lark. Holmes's eyebrows rose a fraction. Edwin Lark, he repeated, a clerk in the employ of the firm Darnley and Spence, shipping agents at Billingsgate, 32 years of age, a steady man by reputation, but lately troubled by debts. Harrow stared. You know him too? I know of him, said Holmes. I make it my business to know of those persons who might, by virtue of circumstance, become interesting. Go on. Harrow passed a hand over his forehead. Lark sent for me yesterday, he said. A note to my chambers, very short, very urgent, and he begged me to come to Hobson's Court at 9 o'clock and to tell no one. We were at school together. He has helped me before. I went. You arrived at 9, said Holmes. I did. The fog was dreadful. I remember it because I could scarcely find the alley. Twice I took the wrong turning and ended up in some other court. When I reached Hobson's Court, the place seemed deserted. There was a lamp over the entrance, but it was turned low, and the air smelled of damp plaster and coal smoke. I climbed to his room, 3rd floor at the back. And he was not there. Holmes's tone was mild, but his eyes were like a cat's. He was there, Harrow whispered, but not as a man ought to be. He stopped. For a moment the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the faint hiss of the fog against the window panes. Well, how was he found? Holmes asked gently. In the passage outside his room, said Harrow. On the landing there is a narrow little strip of corridor, hardly wide enough for 2 men to pass. He lay there on his back, his eyes open. There was a mark upon his throat, dark, as if from cord or wire. His face, God help me, his face was twisted, as though he had tried to cry out, but could not. I saw his hands clench and unclench upon his knees. And you raised the alarm. I did. I hammered on doors. A woman came out first, Mrs. Prendergast. She keeps the rooms on the 2nd floor. Then 2 men, lodgers. Someone fetched the constable from Fleet Street. Then the inspector came. Inspector Lestrade himself. Holmes's mouth tightened at the name, as though the thought of Lestrade were a flavour he found both familiar and slightly disagreeable.
And what does Lestrade say? He asked. He says, Harrow replied, voice shaking with indignation, that Lark was murdered by a thief in the alley. There have been attacks there before, you know. A man was found beaten last month near Shoe Lane. Lestrade says Lark must have surprised someone or resisted, but it makes no sense, Mr. Holmes, none. Holmes's eyes glinted. No, said he softly. It makes no sense. Therefore it is likely to be true of something else. What is the other explanation? Harrow swallowed. They think it was me. I confess that I started in my chair. Even Holmes's expression changed, only slightly, but enough that I saw at once the case had indeed touched something beyond the ordinary. You? Holmes repeated. On what grounds? Because I was the one who found him, Harrow burst out.
Because I had been summoned secretly, because there was a quarrel between us. A quarrel? Holmes's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. Explain. Harrow's cheeks flushed. He wanted money, he said. I had none to give. Or rather, I have debts of my own, Mr. Holmes. God knows a young barrister cannot live on honour alone. Lark accused me of ingratitude. He said harsh things. I said harsh things back. We parted badly. And you left him alive? Yes, yes, of course. I left at perhaps 9:15. He was alive, angry, but alive, I swear it. I went down the stairs. I remember meeting a man coming up, a heavy fellow with a cap pulled low. I thought nothing of it then, and then this morning Lestrade sends a message to my chambers that I am to attend at Scotland Yard to answer questions. Why, he has not arrested me yet, but he watches me. He means to. Holmes's long fingers tapped softly upon the arm of the sofa. You have not told me the most important detail, he said. Harrow blinked. What detail? Why Lark sent for you, said Holmes, and why he told you to tell no one. The young man hesitated. His eyes flicked to the door, as though he feared someone might be listening outside. It concerns a document, he said at last. A letter. Something he had found at Darnley and Spence. Holmes's gaze sharpened further. A letter which implicates someone? Yes, Harrow said, his voice dropping. Someone of position. Lark said he had stumbled upon proof of a fraud. He would not write the particulars. He said only that if he spoke of it openly, he would be ruined or killed. And you believed him? I did not know what to think, Harrow confessed. Lark could be melodramatic, but the note frightened me. And when I reached him, he was in a state of agitation. He kept glancing toward the window, toward the corridor. He said he was watched. Holmes turned his head slightly toward me, and I knew that look. The look which meant that his mind was already darting like a hound along half a dozen scent trails. And the letter? Said he. Did he show it to you? He did, Harrow replied. At least he showed me an envelope. He said the letter was inside, but he would not let me take it. He said he needed my advice first. He wanted to know whether he could go to the police, or whether he should take it to a particular man.
I urged him to give it to the police. He laughed bitterly and said the police would give it straight back to the very hands he feared. And then you quarrelled, Holmes murmured. Yes. He demanded that I help him approach this man of position. I told him it was madness. He accused me of cowardice. He said I had grown soft in my respectable chambers. I told him he was risking his neck for nothing. He demanded money for expenses, he said. I could not give it. The quarrel grew heated. Holmes nodded slowly. And the envelope? It was on the table, said Harrow. A thick one, sealed, addressed in a bold hand. There was a crest impressed on the flap. Some sort of device. I did not recognize it. And when you left? I saw him put it into the drawer of his desk, Harrow answered. He locked it.
I remember, because he jingled the keys and said, "There are locks even you cannot pick, Julian." He tried to smile, but he was too frightened. Holmes sat back. So, said he, a frightened clerk, a sealed envelope with a crest, a quarrel with the last man to see him alive, and a body found upon a landing in a fog-bound lodging-house. This is indeed the sort of little puzzle which Scotland Yard finds so comforting, because it fits neatly into a familiar box. Harrow leaned forward. "You will help me, Mr. Holmes?" he pleaded. "If I am arrested, if this goes to court, my career is ended, and worse, if Lark was killed because of that letter, then whoever sent it, or whoever fears it, will not stop. There may be another death." Holmes looked into the fire, as if reading some message in the coals. "We will see," he said at last. "First,
A few questions. You say you met a man on the stairs as you left. Describe him." Harrow frowned, striving to recall. He was broad, thick in the shoulders. He wore a rough coat, dark, a cap pulled down. I saw his jaw, stubbled. He did not look at me. "Smell?" Holmes asked abruptly. "Smell?" Yes, said Holmes. Tobacco, spirits, leather, fish, chemicals, anything. Harrow blinked, surprised by the oddity. He smelled, he said slowly, of something sharp, like metal, or perhaps oil. Holmes's eyes flashed to mine for an instant. Then he returned to Harrow. And the time between your leaving and the alarm? I do not know, Harrow admitted. I left at 9:15. I went straight home by cab. I did not return. The body was discovered by me? No, by me finding it? Wait, no, I found it at 9, but I found it then. He faltered.
On confusion breaking through his composure. Holmes's voice was quick now, precise. You said you found him when you arrived at 9, but you also said you spoke with him and quarrelled. Harrow's face went utterly white. My God, he whispered. You are right. I... He pressed both hands to his temples as though they ached. I arrived at 9 and went to his room. He opened the door. He was alive. We spoke. The quarrel, yes. And then I left. I must have found him after I left, but that is impossible, unless... His breathing quickened. I could see panic rising in him like a tide. Holmes's voice cut through it. Compose yourself, said he firmly. You have merely misordered events under stress. Tell me again, slowly, what happened from the moment you entered Hobson's court. Harrow took a shuddering breath. I entered. I climbed. I knocked. He opened. We talked. Then I left. I went down the stairs. I met the man coming up. I went out into the alley. I had gone perhaps 20 paces when I remembered. He had not given me the name of the gentleman with whom he wished me to speak. I turned back. Holmes's face remained still, but there was a new intensity in the room, as though the very air had tightened. I climbed again, Harrow continued, and when I reached the landing he was there. Lying in the corridor outside his room, the door was half open, the lamp on the landing seemed dimmer than before. I thought at first he had fainted. I knelt, and then I saw the mark on his throat. Holmes nodded once. And the man you met on the stairs, was he then above you or below you when you turned back? He had passed me going up, Harrow said, so he was above, unless he turned round. Holmes's fingers resumed their soft tapping. The alley, he said, as if speaking to himself, and the landing. The alley that knew the truth. Harrow looked at him with a mixture of hope and dread. You think the key is in the alley? Holmes's eyes were on Harrow again, and there was something almost kindly in them, though his expression remained sharp. I think, said he, that the alley knows more than either you or Lestrade. It has seen more, heard more, and, if the world is as consistent as it usually is, left traces of what it knows upon the boots and cuffs of those who passed through it. He rose in one smooth motion, the languor falling from him like a discarded cloak. In its place came that alert, sinewy energy which always signalled the beginning of one of his campaigns. Watson, said he, Towie, put on your coat. We are going to Fetter's Alley. I confess that my heart quickened. There are few things more infectious than Holmes's sudden purpose. A moment before, the fog had seemed merely inconvenient. Now, it was the very atmosphere of a drama. I seized my greatcoat and my hat, already picturing that narrow, sinister court where some hidden mechanism of crime had begun to turn. Harrow half rose. You will come at once? At once, said Holmes. If you are innocent, time is your ally only so long as it is not your enemy. And if you are guilty... He allowed himself the faintest smile. And then it will be all the more entertaining. The poor fellow flinched, but the humour, bleak as it was, seemed to steady him. As we descended the stairs and stepped out into the thick London night, One of the gas lamps blurred into halos and the street sounds came muffled and distant. Somewhere, far off, a bell tolled the hour. A cab lurched past like a shadow on wheels. Holmes hailed another, and we climbed within, the door slamming shut upon the warmth of Baker Street and the relative simplicity of ordinary life. The driver clicked to his horse, and we plunged into the fog. I looked across at Holmes, his lean face pale in the dim light, his eyes half closed as though he were already seeing through walls and darkness into the hidden rooms of men's motives. In that moment, I could not have known how strange a truth waited in the stones of a little alley, nor how many honest faces would be unmasked before the end. I knew only this, that London, with all her smoke and secrecy, had once again offered Sherlock Holmes a problem worthy of his peculiar genius, and the alley, Fetter's Alley, was waiting. The cab bore us eastward at a cautious pace, for the fog had thickened into a living thing that clung to horse and wheel alike. Through its shifting curtains I caught glimpses of lamp-posts, their light dulled and distorted, and of shop-fronts already shuttered for the night. Holmes sat opposite me, chin sunk upon his chest, fingers lightly touching one another, his whole attitude one of profound abstraction. Harrow occupied the corner beside him, silent now, as though fearful that any word might undo what little hope he possessed. At length the cab slowed, the driver leaning down to peer ahead. "Fetter's Alley, sir," he called back. "No farther I can take you." We alighted, but the cab, rolling off at once like some phantom conveyance relieved to escape the gloom. Before us yawned the mouth of the alley, a narrow slit between two leaning buildings from which issued a chill breath of damp stone and old refuse. A single gas lamp burned above the entrance, its flame turned low and guttering, so that the shadows beneath it seemed unnaturally deep. Holmes paused at the threshold, drawing a deep breath. "Note the smell, Watson," said he softly. I did so. Beneath the familiar odours of coal smoke and stagnant water there was something else, faint but unmistakable, once perceived. "Oil," I said. "And iron." Holmes nodded. "Just so. The alley announces itself at once." He stepped forward, and we followed, our footsteps sounding hollow upon the stones. The place was deserted, yet it did not feel empty. All windows loomed above us, some dark, some faintly aglow behind thin curtains. Here and there, a door opened directly onto the alley, its paint blistered and its handle dulled by countless hands. Holmes moved slowly, his eyes upon the ground. "The fog is our accomplice tonight," he remarked. "It preserves what the careless might otherwise destroy." He knelt suddenly, his long coat brushing the damp stones, and held his hand an inch above the surface. "Observe," said he. "Here are 3 sets of impressions crossing and recrossing. One narrow and lightly made, Mr. Harrow's no doubt. One broader, with a marked inward turn of the left foot, and a third, irregular, dragging slightly at the toe." Harrow leaned forward. "The heavy man?" he whispered. "Possibly," said Holmes, "but do not be too eager. The alley sees many heavy men. What interests me is not their weight, but their direction." He traced the prints with a forefinger. "Mr. Harrow enters, goes in, returns briefly toward the street, then turns back again. That much you have told us. The broader prints go up the alley, pause near Hobson's Court, and then, note this, return before Mr. Harrow does." Harrow's breath caught. "Then he did not pass me on the stairs after all?" "He passed you on the stairs, certainly," Holmes replied. "But he had already been here once before you turned back." We advanced to the lodging-house. Hobson's Court rose before us, a narrow structure of 3 stories, its bricks dark with age and damp. The door stood ajar, as though it had never quite recovered from the commotion of the previous night. Holmes entered without ceremony. The passage within was close and ill-lit, or the air stale. A woman's voice sounded faintly from above, and somewhere a child coughed. The staircase creaked under our weight. On the second-floor landing, Holmes paused, bending once more. "Blood," said he quietly. I saw it then, a faint smear upon the wall, half wiped away, and a darker stain upon the worn carpet. "It has been cleaned," I observed. "Attempted," Holmes corrected. "And badly. Note how it has been smeared downward, as though by a cloth held by an impatient hand. Whoever did this was in haste." We reached the third floor. The corridor here was as Harrow had described it, a narrow strip, barely lit by a small lamp, whose glass was clouded with grime. A door stood half open at the far end. Holmes approached it, then stopped. "Stand back," said he. He examined the threshold with minute care. "The body lay here," he said, would indicating a spot just outside the door. "Drag no distance at all, which suggests that the murder occurred very nearly where the victim was found." "But he was strangled," I said. "There would have been a struggle." "Not necessarily," Holmes replied. "A man surprised, seized from behind, may have little opportunity to resist, especially if he is already in a state of nervous agitation." He straightened and turned to Harrow. "You said the lamp seemed dimmer when you returned," he said. "Yes," Harrow answered eagerly. "I remember thinking so." Holmes smiled thinly. "The lamp is turned down now," said he, "but not extinguished. Someone wished to see, but not to be seen too clearly." He entered the room. It was small and plainly furnished, a bed, a desk, a chair. The drawer of the desk stood open, its lock splintered. Holmes's eyes went at once to it. "The envelope," he murmured. "Gone." He examined the lock. "Broken with a narrow instrument," said he. "Not a key, not brute force." He crossed to the window and pushed it open. The fog pressed in at once, swirling like a living thing. "Here," said he, "footprints upon the sill and a faint trace of oil again." Harrow stared. "He escaped through the window." "He entered that way," Holmes replied. "At least once. The alley provided him access. He went up, down and up again. Testing, perhaps, or waiting for his moment." He turned back into the room and glanced at the bed. "See here, Watson, the coverlet is disturbed, but not as by a struggle, rather as though something had been placed beneath it and then removed." I lifted the edge. "A space," I said, "as if an object had been there." "Precisely. The envelope was hidden here initially. When Mr. Harrow arrived, it was moved to the desk. That was a mistake." Harrow sank onto the chair. "And the crest?" he asked. "The seal." Holmes's expression grew intent. "Describe it again." "A shield," Harrow said slowly, "with, if I recall, some sort of bird, and a diagonal stripe." Holmes closed his eyes for a moment, as though consulting some inner catalogue. "There are not many such devices in London commerce," he said at last. "Fewer still among those connected with shipping?" He stepped back into the corridor. "One more thing," said he. "The body was found here, yet the attack may have begun elsewhere." He bent, sniffing the air. "Metal and oil again," he murmured. "Stronger here." His gaze lifted to the ceiling, where a narrow hatch gave access to the roof. "Interesting," said he. "What is interesting?" Harrow asked. "That the alley knew enough to tell us who passed through it," Holmes replied. "But the building knows more, and so does the river." "The river?" I echoed. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Where there is shipping, Watson, there is water. And where there is water, there are ways in and ways out that the ordinary mind does not consider." He turned sharply. "Come," said he. We have seen enough here for the moment. Lestrade will arrive soon if he hasn't already. I prefer to let him believe he is in command. As we descended the stairs, a door opened, and a woman peered out, thin, sharp-faced, her eyes bright with curiosity and fear. "Mr. Holmes," she said eagerly. "They said you might come." Holmes inclined his head. "You are Mrs. Prendergast," said he. "You were awake last night." "I was," she said.
"Good, I heard footsteps, more than usual." "At what time?" Holmes asked. She hesitated. "Between 9 and 10, there was a man on the stairs twice. And once I heard him cough. A nasty cough." Holmes's eyes flicked to me. "Metallic?" said the woman, like he had swallowed something wrong. Holmes thanked her and moved on. Outside, the fog had thinned a little, and the gas lamp flickered more brightly. Holmes paused once more at the mouth of the alley. "The first act is done," said he quietly. "We have a frightened clerk, a vanished letter, and a murderer who walks through fog and oil. The next step is to discover who fears a piece of paper enough to strangle a man for it." Harrow looked at him. Hope and terror mingled. "And can you do that?" Holmes allowed himself the faintest shrug. "The alley has spoken," said he.
Now we must find the voice that taught it what to say." We had not gone 50 yards from the alley when Holmes hailed another cab, his manner betraying none of the leisurely reflection which usually followed an initial reconnaissance. Instead, there was in him a quiet urgency, as though some invisible clock had begun to tick. "To Billingsgate," said he crisply as we climbed inside. Harrow started. "Billingsgate, but Lark's office is precisely where a man would leave his fingerprints upon a letter," Holmes interrupted, "if he were careless, or where another man would leave the smell of oil and iron if he were not." The cab lurched forward. I observed that Holmes had taken from his pocket a small notebook and was already making brief, angular jottings, pausing now and then to stare out into the fog as if checking each note against some external reality. "You think the letter originated at Darnley and Spence?" Harrow said. "I think," Holmes replied, "that the letter passed through there. That is not the same thing. The journey was short. Billingsgate, even at night, never entirely sleeps, and the river lay nearby like a dark, breathing presence. The cab set us down before a squat, stone building whose windows were dimly lit within. Holmes paid the driver and stood for a moment upon the pavement, inhaling deeply. "There it is again," said he. "Oil, machine oil, Watson, not the heavier sort used on ships' engines, but the finer grade used on winches and presses." "You mean for paperwork?" I asked. "For seals," said Holmes. We entered. A night clerk looked up from his desk, startled at the sight of Holmes's lean figure advancing upon him with such quiet authority. "You will excuse us," said Holmes smoothly. "I am conducting an inquiry on behalf of a client of your firm." The clerk hesitated, then nodded as though resistance had never occurred to him. "I was with Mr. Lark yesterday," Holmes went on. "You may remember me." The clerk frowned. "Mr. Lark left early," he said, "just after 4. Seemed put out about something." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "And did anyone call upon him before he left?" The clerk's eyes shifted. "And there was a gentleman," he said. "A gentleman from upstairs." "From upstairs?" I echoed. Holmes's head tilted slightly. "The boardroom," said he. "Continue." "He did not give his name," the clerk went on, "but I have seen him before. He comes occasionally, about accounts, tall, well-dressed. Walks with a cane." Holmes smiled faintly. "A cane with a silver handle," said he. The clerk stared. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" Holmes waved the matter aside. "And Mr. Lark, did he give this gentleman anything?" The clerk hesitated again, then nodded. "He handed him an envelope," he said. "A thick one, sealed." Harrow caught his breath. "The crest?" he whispered. "Yes," said the clerk. "A crest. I remember because Mr. Lark pressed it down hard with his thumb, as though to be sure it held." Holmes turned away at once. "That will be all," said he. "Thank you." Outside, the river's damp air closed about us. Holmes walked briskly now, his eyes alight. "So," said he, "the letter was not hidden from the man it concerned. It was shown to him." "Then why kill Lark?" Harrow demanded. If he already had the letter, because," Holmes replied, "a letter may have a twin, or a memory, or a witness." He stopped suddenly. "Watson," said he, "what did Mrs. Prendergast tell us?" "That she heard a cough," I said. "A metallic cough." "Just so. A man with a silver-topped cane. Silver, Watson, is a soft metal. It wears. It must be polished. And what does one use to polish silver?" "Oil," I said, slowly. Holmes nodded. "A gentleman who walks with a cane, but climbs stairs twice in one night. A gentleman who works with documents but smells of metal. A gentleman who believes himself clever enough to frighten a clerk into silence, and fails." Harrow's face had gone grey. "You know who it is," he said. Holmes did not answer at once. We had reached a quieter stretch near the river, where the lamps were fewer and the fog thicker. "Oh, I know who fears exposure," Holmes said at last. "That is not quite the same thing." He turned sharply. "Mr. Harrow, when Lark spoke of going to the police, you urged him to do so. Why?" Harrow blinked. "Because I thought it safest." "Or because," Holmes continued gently, "you believed the police would be obliged to act if the matter involved a man of standing?" Harrow opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I did not think—" "No," said Holmes, "seeing you felt." He stopped and faced him fully. "You have been honest with us," he said, "but not complete. You knew the man whose crest was on that envelope." Harrow's shoulders sagged. "Yes," he whispered. "I did." "And you did not tell me," Holmes said quietly, "because you feared I would see at once what you have only begun to suspect." Harrow looked up, misery in his eyes. "It was Sir Alistair Crowcombe," he said, "one of the firm's chief backers, a baronet, a man with influence. Lark said the letter proved that Crowcombe had diverted shipping funds, small sums but over years, enough to ruin him." Holmes nodded. "And Sir Alistair walks with a silver-topped cane," he said, "and he coughs." "Yes," Harrow said hoarsely, "he has for years." Holmes drew a deep breath. "Then we are close," said he, "but not close enough. Influence alone does not kill. Fear does." A sound came from behind us, a footstep, then another. Holmes's hand went up warningly. From the fog emerged a figure, tall and stooping slightly, a cane tapping softly upon the stones. "Well," said a cultured voice, "this is an unexpected pleasure, Mr. Holmes." The man stepped into the lamplight. He was grey-haired, with a distinguished face and cold, of intelligent eyes. The silver head of his cane gleamed. "I wondered how long it would take you," Sir Alistair Crowcombe went on. "You always do arrive eventually, do you not?" Holmes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Usually," said he, just in time. Sir Alistair Crowcombe regarded us with an expression of urbane curiosity, as though he had encountered acquaintances at a club rather than in a fog-laden street by the river. He inclined his head slightly to Holmes, then allowed his gaze to rest upon Harrow, lingering there a fraction longer than courtesy required. "You look ill, Mr. Harrow," he observed mildly. "I trust you are not overworking yourself. The law is a jealous master." Harrow made no reply. His lips were pressed tightly together, and his eyes never left the baronet's face. Holmes stepped aside, positioning himself so that the lamplight fell squarely upon Crowcombe. "You are abroad late, Sir Alistair," said he. "One might almost think you were keeping watch." Crowcombe smiled faintly. "I find the river air beneficial," he said. "My cough is troublesome in close rooms. Besides, London is never so honest as it is after dark. Men forget themselves." "On the contrary," Holmes returned quietly, "they reveal themselves." Crowcombe's fingers tightened imperceptibly upon the cane. "I was sorry to hear of poor Lark's death," he went on. "A regrettable business. I understand the police are satisfied it was the work of a common ruffian." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Already?" said he. "The body has been cold barely a day." Crowcombe shrugged. "Scotland Yard moves quickly when it wishes to reassure," he said. "And this is hardly a matter that should trouble the public imagination." "No," said Holmes, "only the private conscience." There was a pause. The fog eddied between us, and somewhere a bell on the river clanged hollowly. "You have been speaking to my clerk," Crowcombe said at last, his tone sharpening. "I dislike my affairs being pried into." "I dislike murder," Holmes replied. "We all have our preferences." Crowcombe's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Holmes. "You accuse me?" he asked. "I accuse no one," Holmes said calmly. "I observe." "And what do you observe?" Crowcombe asked. "That you visited Edwin Lark yesterday," Holmes said. "That you received from him a sealed envelope bearing your crest. That you returned to Hobson's Court after Mr. Harrow had left, and that you departed without that envelope." Harrow gave a low sound in his throat. Crowcombe laughed softly. "A clever sequence," he said, "but incomplete. I did indeed visit Lark. I wished to know what nonsense he was circulating. He was agitated, impertinent, and, sadly, unbalanced. I took from him a letter which contained false accusations. I left him alive. What happened afterward is not my concern." "You returned," Holmes said. Crowcombe's smile faded. "You have no proof of that?" Holmes nodded. "None that would satisfy a jury," he agreed. "Proof is a blunt instrument. I prefer precision." He stepped closer. "You have a habit, Sir Alistair, of polishing the head of your cane," he said conversationally. "It is worn thin on one side. That suggests nervous repetition. And you did so last night, before climbing the stairs." Crowcombe's hand stilled. "You also have oil upon your glove," Holmes continued. "The same oil found upon the windowsill at Hobson's Court. And when you cough, there is a metallic note, a sound produced when the throat has been compressed and strained." Crowcombe's eyes hardened. "You tread dangerous ground, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled faintly. "I have always found it firm." Crowcombe straightened. "You have nothing," he said. "Lark was a blackmailer. I silenced him with reason. Others may have done so with violence. If you persist, you will find yourself opposed by forces you do not understand." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "I understand them very well. Influence, reputation, fear of disgrace, they are the oldest motives in the world." Crowcombe's gaze slid once more to Harrow. And you, sir," he said softly. "You would do well to remember that careers may be ended by association." Holmes interposed himself slightly. "You mistake the nature of this interview," he said. "We are not here to threaten. We are here to inform." Crowcombe arched an eyebrow. "Inform me of what?" "That you have made an error," Holmes said. "You believed the letter to be unique. It was not." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Crowcombe's face. "You lie," he said. Holmes shook his head. "Lark was a methodical man," he said. "He copied everything. Accounts, correspondence, evidence. He left a second record." "Where?" Crowcombe demanded. Holmes's smile widened just enough to be unsettling. "That," said he, "is precisely what you are anxious to discover." Crowcombe took a step back, then checked himself. "You are playing a game," he said coldly. "I am," Holmes agreed, "and you are already moving your pieces." Crowcombe's gaze hardened. "Then I shall take my leave," he said. "I trust, Mr. Holmes, that you will enjoy the rest of your evening." He turned, his cane tapping sharply, as he strode away into the fog. Within moments he was swallowed by it, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the faint gleam of silver. Harrow sagged against the wall. "You let him go," he whispered. "He'll destroy the evidence, whatever remains." Holmes watched the fog thoughtfully. "On the contrary," he said, "he will hurry to secure it, and in doing so he will lead us straight to it." I stared at him. "You told him there was a second copy," I said. "Is there?" Holmes's eyes twinkled. "There will be," he said. "By tomorrow." He turned briskly. "Come, Watson," he added. "We must prepare. Sir Alister is a cautious man, but caution gives way when panic intrudes. He will not sleep tonight." "And what of Lestrade?" I asked. Holmes's lips curved in amusement. "Lestrade will do precisely what he always does," said he. "Arrive late, blunder loudly, and take credit at the end. But first, we must give him something solid enough that even he cannot miss it." He hailed another cab. "To Baker Street," said he. "We have a long night ahead." As the cab pulled away, I looked back once more at the river, shrouded in mist and secrecy. Somewhere within that darkness moved a man who believed himself safe behind his title and his influence. Yet I had learned, in my time with Sherlock Holmes, that no fog, however thick, could long conceal the truth from a mind that knew how to follow its faintest outlines. And the truth, I felt certain, was already closing in. We reached Baker Street a little before midnight, the fog thinning at last into a damp, spectral haze. Mrs. Hudson admitted us with a look of concern, for Holmes's eyes were alight with that peculiar intensity which she, like myself, had learned to associate with long hours and little rest. Harrow would have lingered, full of questions and apprehensions, but Holmes dismissed him almost at once. "You will return to your chambers," said he firmly. "You will speak to no one. If you are summoned by the police, you will go, and you will tell them the truth, but no more than you are asked. Above all, you will not attempt heroics." Harrow hesitated. "And if Sir Alister—" "Moves," Holmes finished. "He will move tonight, which is precisely why you must not." When the young barrister had gone, Holmes shut the door and turned to me with a look of brisk satisfaction. "Now, Watson," said he, rubbing his hands together, "we manufacture bait." He went at once to his desk and drew from a drawer a stack of papers, old shipping manifests, correspondence, ledgers of no particular value. Sorting rapidly, he selected several sheets and spread them before him. "Lark copied accounts," he said. "That was his strength and his downfall. A clerk's faith in paper is touching but dangerous. We must give Crowcombe something that looks enough like proof to alarm him, yet not so much that he suspects a ruse." "You mean to forge evidence?" I asked. Holmes shot me a reproachful glance. "I mean to reconstruct likelihood," he said. "Forgery implies invention. I merely arrange existing truths into a persuasive shape." He worked swiftly, annotating margins, adding dates, transposing figures. Within an hour there lay before him a neat packet, convincing, damning at a glance, yet incomplete to a trained eye. "This," said he, tapping it, "will not stand in court, but it will stand in the imagination of a guilty man." "And how do you propose he finds it?" I asked. Holmes smiled thinly. "By doing precisely what he believes himself clever enough to do," he said. searching for it. He sealed the packet in a stout envelope and impressed upon it a plain wax seal. "No crest," he said. "Anxiety sharpens perception, but panic dulls it." At 2 o'clock he rang for a messenger and sent a brief note to Inspector Lestrade requesting his presence at Baker Street in connection with the Hobson's Court affair. "He will come," Holmes remarked dryly. Curiosity and vanity are his strongest inducements." When Lestrade arrived an hour later, breathless and faintly belligerent, Holmes greeted him with exaggerated cordiality. "Delighted you could join us," said he. "You are, I trust, making excellent progress with your alley murderer." Lestrade sniffed. "Open and shut," said he. "Clerk quarrels with friend, friend kills clerk. Happens every day." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Indeed," he said. "Then I fear I'm about to complicate your day." He laid out the envelope and summarized with admirable economy the events of the night and his conclusions, omitting, I noted, nothing of importance, yet presenting it in such a way that Lestrade might feel the solution had always been within his grasp. Lestrade frowned, then stiffened. "Sir Alister Crowcombe," he said. "You're mad, Holmes."
"That's the baronet." "A baronet with motive," Holmes replied. "And opportunity?" Lestrade hesitated. "And proof?" Holmes smiled. "That," said he, "we are about to obtain with your assistance." He explained his plan briefly. Lestrade protested, blustered, then subsided, drawn in despite himself. "Very well," he said at last. "But if this goes wrong—" "It will not," Holmes assured him. "Men like Crowcombe cannot resist the chance to erase danger." We set out again before dawn, Holmes carrying the envelope in the inner pocket of his coat. The streets were quieter now, the fog lifting to reveal a pale, colourless sky. We did not go to Hobson's Court, but to a small building overlooking the river, a disused counting house once leased by Darnley and Spence, and still known to certain insiders. "This," Holmes murmured, "is where Lark worked late on occasion, and where he would have hidden anything he feared to keep at home." He slipped the envelope behind a loose brick in the wall, then carefully disturbed the dust around it. "Now," said he, "we wait." We had not long to do so. Within the hour, a familiar figure appeared at the far end of the street. Sir Alister Crowcombe, his coat drawn tight, his cane tapping more sharply than before. He paused, scanning his surroundings, then approached the building. Holmes touched Lestrade's sleeve. "Observe," he whispered. Crowcombe entered. Minutes passed, long strained ones. At last the door opened again. Crowcombe emerged, the envelope clutched in his hand. His face was no longer composed. It was drawn, pale, and set in grim determination. Lestrade stepped forward. "Sir Alister Crowcombe," he called.
I arrest you on suspicion of murder." Crowcombe froze. For a heartbeat he considered flight, then the futility of it showed in his eyes. The envelope slipped from his fingers and fell to the stones. Holmes picked it up. "You see," said he quietly, "how obliging fear can be." Crowcombe's shoulders sagged. "You have ruined me," he said hoarsely. "You ruined yourself," Holmes replied, "when you chose strangulation over disgrace." Crowcombe said no more. Lestrade signalled to a constable, and they led the baronet away, his silver-topped cane left lying forgotten upon the ground. As the sky brightened into morning, Holmes turned to me, his manner already relaxing, the tension draining from him like ebbing tide. "A tidy little affair," he said. "The alley told us who passed through it. The river told us where secrets travel."
The rest was merely listening." "And Harrow?" I asked. Holmes smiled. "He will be exonerated," he said, "and perhaps wiser. A man should never underestimate how much truth clings to stone and shadow. We walked back toward Baker Street as London stirred awake around us. The fog was gone now, but I reflected that some things, once seen clearly, can never be obscured again. The formalities that followed were conducted with a thoroughness that even Inspector Lestrade could not fault. By mid-morning, Sir Alistair Crowcombe had been conveyed to Scotland Yard, where the discovery of the envelope, combined with the testimony of the night clerk, Mrs. Prendergast, and the evidence recovered from Hobson's court, wove together into a fabric of proof from which there was no clean escape. The broken lock, the oil-stained sill, and the duplicated accounts found later that day in the disused counting-house all spoke with one voice. Harrow was summoned in the afternoon, pale but composed. I accompanied Holmes to the yard, where Lestrade, flushed with triumph and importance, ushered us into a small interview room. "You were right, Holmes," he admitted grudgingly. Crowcombe cracked faster than I expected, confessed to confronting Lark the second time, claimed it was an accident, panic, he says, but the jury will see through that. Holmes merely inclined his head. "Panic," said he, the most truthful of confessions. When Harrow was brought in, Holmes studied him closely. "You are free of suspicion," Holmes said quietly. "Your movements last night are corroborated, and the timing of Crowcombe's return seals the matter." Harrow's breath escaped him in a long, shaky sigh. "Oh, I owe you everything," he said. "I don't know how to thank you." Holmes waved the sentiment aside. "By remembering," said he, "that truth is not less dangerous because it is written down, and by choosing more carefully whose secrets you agree to carry." Later, as we walked back through the awakening streets, Harrow turned once more. "What of Lark?" he asked. "He died believing he had failed." Holmes shook his head. "No," said he. "He died having done exactly what frightened men most, leaving traces. His mistake was not trusting paper too much, but trusting power too little." By the time we returned to Baker Street, the city had fully shrugged off the night. The fog was gone, replaced by a brittle winter sun that threw sharp lines across the pavement. Holmes sank into his chair with a sigh that was half fatigue, half satisfaction, and accepted the cup of coffee I poured for him. "Well, Watson," he said, "well, what do you make of it?" "That the alley truly did know the truth," I replied, "and that you forced it to speak." Holmes smiled faintly. "The alley merely recorded," said he. "It is men who insist on leaving signatures, on stones, on air, on their own habits. Crowcombe believed influence could erase consequence. He forgot that fear always leaves footprints." He fell silent then, gazing into the fire, as if already turning the case into an abstraction, a solved problem filed away among many others. After a moment, he reached for his violin and drew the bow lightly across the strings. The first notes were low and contemplative, echoing softly through the room. I watched him, struck as always by the strange duality of the man, capable of relentless logic one moment, or one of reflective melancholy the next. "Will you write this one up?" he asked suddenly. "I intend to," I said. "See that you do," Holmes replied. "But be kind to the alley. It did not choose its role." As evening drew in, a light rain began to fall, washing the streets clean and softening the city's hard outlines. Somewhere beyond our windows, Fetter's Alley lay quiet once more, its stones bearing no outward mark of the truth they had briefly held. Yet I knew, and Holmes knew, that London never truly forgets. It remembers in fragments and shadows, in worn steps and polished silver, waiting patiently for the rare mind willing to listen. Holmes laid his violin aside and leaned back, his eyes half closed. "The game," he murmured, "is finished, until the next begins." And with that,
He reached for his pipe, already moving on.
While I, faithful recorder of his peculiar genius, sat down to write.